Sometimes, life gives you exactly what you need, even when it looks like nothing at all. Cal Mason knew that feeling better than most, standing on the cracked concrete of an abandoned shipping port that everyone called worthless. The single father had inherited this place from his uncle. People in town laughed at him for keeping it. They said he should sell the land and take the money. Cal worked 2 jobs just to pay rent. But something told him this old port meant more than quick cash. Walking those empty docks with his son Tommy, Cal saw past the rust and decay. The massive cranes still stood strong. The shipping containers held stories from around the world. This place had history. Maybe it could have a future too. Cal had no idea that buried under Dock 14 was a secret worth $154 million. What would you do if your biggest burden suddenly became your greatest blessing? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 4:30, same as every weekday for the past 3 years. Cal Mason's calloused hand found the snooze button by muscle memory, his body protesting the familiar routine. 5 more minutes, just 5 more minutes, before another day of keeping his world from falling apart. The small apartment felt even smaller in the grey morning light, filtering through thin curtains. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. The rent was $800 a month, which might as well have been $8,000 on his factory wages. But it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was theirs. Tommy's bedroom door stood slightly ajar, revealing the 10-year-old's sleeping form buried under a pile of blankets that had long since lost their vibrant colors. His son slept like he did everything else, with complete commitment, arms flung wide, dark hair tousled across the pillow. On the nightstand sat Tommy's most prized possession, a sketch pad filled with drawings of ships, planes, and adventures in far-off places. The boy had inherited more than his father's stubborn chin and deep brown eyes. He'd gotten the dreamer's heart, too. Cal padded to the kitchen, his bare feet silent on the worn linoleum. Coffee first, then a quick shower, then the 20-minute drive to Hartwell Manufacturing, where he'd spend the next 8 hours running quality control on engine parts. After that, if he was lucky, he'd grab a quick dinner before heading to his evening job cleaning offices downtown. 2 jobs, 7 days a week, and he still came up short most months. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the quiet apartment with its familiar rhythm. Through the kitchen window, Cal could see the edge of the harbor district, where massive shipping cranes stood silhouetted against the lightening sky. Somewhere out there, past the active commercial docks, sat his inheritance, 37 acres of abandoned shipping port that Uncle Ray had left him 6 months ago. Raymond Mason had been his father's younger brother, a man of few words and fewer explanations. Cal remembered visiting the port as a child, back when Uncle Ray still lived in the small office building near the main gate. The place had seemed magical, Thena gateway to the world, where massive cargo ships arrived, carrying goods from places with names Tommy now sketched in the margins of his homework. "Morning, Dad." Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair sticking up at impossible angles, wearing pajamas decorated with cartoon sharks. "Morning, buddy. You're up early." Tommy shrugged, the gesture so reminiscent of his mother that Cal felt the familiar tug of loss in his chest. Maria had been gone for 2 years now, cancer taking her with the same swift efficiency it had taken his own parents. Some mornings, Cal still reached for her side of the bed, still expected to hear her voice calling Tommy to breakfast. "Can we go to the port today?" Tommy asked, climbing onto one of the mismatched kitchen chairs. "You said maybe this weekend." Cal poured orange juice into a glass, buying himself time to think. The port was a 40-minute drive from town, and gas money was tight. But the hope in his son's voice made the decision easy. "After I get home from work. Deal?" Tommy's face lit up. "Can I bring my sketch pad?" "Always." The boy had become fascinated with the port after their first visit following Uncle Ray's funeral. While Cal saw rust and decay, Tommy saw possibility. He'd fill page after page with drawings of the Placenote as it was, but as it could be. Ships docking again, cranes lifting cargo, people working and laughing among the massive steel structures. Mrs. Chen from the apartment next door knocked on the door at 7 sharp, same as always. The elderly woman had been watching Tommy after school since Maria's death, refusing to accept more than token payment despite Cal's protests. She spoke little English, but her kindness needed no translation. "He good boy," she always said when Cal tried to thank her. "We help family." At the factory, Cal fell into the familiar rhythm of inspecting parts, checking measurements, marking defects. The work was steady but mind-numbing, leaving too much time to think about unpaid bills, Tommy's worn sneakers, and the stack of notices from the bank about his overdue mortgage payments on the apartment. During his lunch break, he called Jake Hendricks, his best friend since high school and the only person who didn't think he was crazy for keeping the port. "You should come by tonight," Cal said, phone pressed to his ear as he sat in his truck in the factory parking lot. "Tommy wants to show you his latest drawings." Jake's laugh came through the speaker, warm and familiar. "That kid's got more vision than half the city planners in this town. You know what I heard yesterday? Peterson Development Group is sniffing around the harbor district again. Word is they're looking to buy up waterfront property for some big resort project." Cal felt his stomach tighten. Peterson Development had approached him twice since Uncle Ray's death, offering increasingly generous sums for the port property. The latest figure had been enough to pay off his debts and set up a college fund for Tommy. It was more money than Cal had ever seen in one place. "They can keep looking," Cal said. "That port isn't for sale." "I know, brother. Just thought you should know they're not giving up." After work, Cal kept his promise. He picked up Tommy and drove out to the port, watching his son's excitement build as they approached the massive gates. The security fence was mostly intact, though rust had claimed large sections. Uncle Ray's old office building sat just inside the entrance, its windows boarded up but the structure still solid. Tommy ran ahead as they walked down the main dock, his sketchpad clutched in one hand. The port stretched out before them like a sleeping giant 47 shipping berths, 6 massive cranes, and enough storage space to handle cargo from around the world. In its heyday, the Mason family port had employed over 300 people and handled 20% of the region's maritime trade. That was before the shipping industry consolidated. Before the bigger ports in neighboring cities offered better deals and more modern facilities. Before Uncle Ray's health failed and the contracts dried up one by one. Now, seagulls nested in the crane operator cabins and weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete. But the bones of the operation remained sound. The docks were still solid, the cranes still operational. The massive warehouse buildings needed work, but their steel frames had weathered decades without major damage. "Look, Dad," Tommy called from beside one of the shipping containers. "Someone painted a number here 14, and there's a symbol underneath." Cal walked over to examine what his son had found. The number 14 was painted in faded white letters on the side of a rust-red container. Below it, barely visible, was a small symbol that looked like an anchor crossed with a compass rose. "Uncle Ray probably used it to organize the containers," Cal said, though something about the symbol nagged at him. It seemed too deliberate, too carefully placed to be a simple organizational tool. They spent an hour exploring, Tommy filling 3 pages of his sketchpad with drawings of cranes and cargo holds. As the sun began to set, painting the harbor in shades of gold and orange, Cal found himself seeing the place through his son's eyes. The potential hidden beneath the rust and neglect. On the drive home, Tommy chatted about his plans for the port, a museum in one of the warehouses, a playground near the office building, maybe even a small restaurant where families could eat while watching the ships come and go. "Do you think Uncle Ray would like my ideas?" Tommy asked as they pulled into their apartment complex. Cal parked the truck and looked at his son, really looked at him. 10 years old, motherless, living in a cramped apartment with a father who worked too much and worried constantly about money. Yet here he was, dreaming big dreams, and seeing beauty in broken places. I think he'd love them, buddy. I think that's exactly what he'd want for that place. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Cal sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and Uncle Ray's will spread out before him. The document was simple enough: the port, all its assets, and a small savings account that barely covered the inheritance taxes. But there was something else, a line he'd overlooked in the emotional aftermath of the funeral, including all contents, documented and undocumented, above and below ground, belonging to the estate of Raymond Mason. Above and below ground. Cal had assumed that meant the buildings and foundations, maybe some buried utilities. But now, thinking about that strange symbol on container 14, he wondered if Uncle Ray had been more cryptic than simple. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Coffee tomorrow morning? Got something to show you about the port's history." Cal typed back, 7 a.m., Mel's Diner. As he turned off the lights and headed to bed, Cal paused at Tommy's doorway. His son had fallen asleep with his sketch pad open beside him, the latest drawing visible in the hallway light. It showed the port, as Tommy imagined it, busy with ships and people, the cranes working, the water sparkling blue under a bright sun. At the bottom of the page, in Tommy's careful 10-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Mason Port where dreams come true." Cal smiled, pulled the boy's blanket up to his chin, and closed the door softly. Maybe Tommy was right. Maybe dreams really could come true, even in the most unlikely places. What he didn't know was that Uncle Ray had believed the same thing, and that belief had led him to hide something extraordinary beneath the weathered docks of the port, something that would change their lives forever. Outside, the harbor fog rolled in from the ocean, wrapping around the sleeping cranes and empty berths like a protective shroud, keeping its secrets safe for one more night. Jake was already waiting at Mel's Diner when Cal arrived, a manila folder spread across the red vinyl booth. The morning coffee crowd filled the small restaurant with the comfortable hum of conversation and clinking silverware. Cal slid into the seat across from his friend, noting the serious expression on Jake's weathered face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Cal said, signaling the waitress for coffee. "Maybe I have." Jake pushed a faded photograph across the table. "Found this in my grandfather's things when I was cleaning out his attic yesterday. Thought you might want to see it." The black and white photo showed the Mason family port in what looked like the 1940s. Ships crowded the berths, but these weren't the usual cargo vessels. Men in military uniforms supervised the unloading of what appeared to be civilians' families with suitcases, children clinging to their parents' hands. "My grandfather worked the docks back then," Jake explained. "He never talked much about the war years, but he kept this photo all these years. Look at the back." Cal flipped the photo over. In faded pencil, someone had written, "Operation Safe Harbor Ray Mason, coordinating refugee assistance, September 1943. Your Uncle Ray was running some kind of refugee operation during the war," Jake said quietly. "My grandfather mentioned it once, said Ray was helping families escape from Europe, but I always thought it was just stories." Cal studied the photograph more carefully. There, standing near the main dock office, was a younger version of Uncle Ray. Even in the grainy image, Cal could see the determined set of his uncle's jaw, the same stubborn expression Tommy had inherited. "There's more," Jake continued, pulling out a yellowed newspaper clipping. "This is from the local paper, October 1943. Local port assists in humanitarian efforts." The brief article mentioned the Mason family port's role in housing refugees temporarily, but the details were vague. "Due to wartime security," the piece concluded, "specific information about arrival schedules and passenger manifests cannot be disclosed." Cal felt something shift in his understanding of Uncle Ray. The quiet man who'd fixed his bicycle and taught him to tie knots had been involved in something far more significant than Cal had ever imagined. "Why are you showing me this now?" Cal asked. Jake's expression grew more serious. "Because yesterday, after I called you, I got a visit from a man claiming to be a historian. European accent, expensive suit." said he was researching wartime shipping records and wanted to know if I had any information about the Mason port during the 1940s. What did you tell him? Nothing. Told him to contact you directly if he had questions. But Cal, something felt off about the guy. He was too interested, too eager. And when I mentioned you still owned the port, his whole demeanor changed. Cal pocketed the photograph and newspaper clipping. I need to get to the port. If Uncle Ray was involved in something during the war, there might be records. Want company? Actually, yes. I could use another set of eyes. They drove to the port in Cal's truck, the morning fog still clinging to the harbor. As they approached the main gate, Cal noticed something that made him slow down. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel leading to the fence line. Someone's been here recently, Jake observed. They parked near the office building and walked the perimeter. The fence was intact, but near the back corner, Jake found something troubling, a section where the chain link had been carefully cut and rewired, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Professional job, Jake muttered. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Cal's pulse quickened. He led Jake to the office building, using Uncle Ray's keys to unlock the front door. The main floor had been cleared out years ago, but Cal had never thoroughly explored the upper levels. The second floor contained Uncle Ray's personal office, a cramped space overlooking the main dock. File cabinets lined one wall, their contents mostly routine business documents from the port's active years. But behind Uncle Ray's desk, Cal discovered something he'd missed during his previous visits, a section of wall paneling that didn't quite match the rest. Jake, look at this. The panel moved when Cal pressed against it, revealing a narrow space behind the wall. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound ledger. Cal opened it carefully. The pages contained entries in Uncle Ray's precise handwriting, but these weren't shipping manifests or business records. Each entry was dated between 1941 and 1945, with notations that made Cal's breath catch. September 15, 1943, Manifest H47, 15 families, Vienna to New York, via Lisbon, personal effects secured in Container 14A. Documentation transferred to Safe Harbor Foundation. October 3, 1943, emergency arrival. SS Bremen passengers, Copenhagen route compromised. 37 individuals, high-value items secured pending family contact. December 12, 1943, final Christmas transport. 42 passengers, including 17 children, cultural artifacts and family heirlooms stored per protocol. May they find peace in this new land. Page after page, detailed arrivals, the careful cataloguing of personal belongings, and Uncle Ray's obvious commitment to protecting not just lives, but the treasures that represented entire family histories. My God, Jake whispered, reading over Cal's shoulder. He wasn't just helping refugees escape, he was preserving their lives, their culture, everything they couldn't carry. Cal found a map tucked into the back of the ledger, a detailed layout of the port, with specific containers and locations marked with the same anchor and compass symbol Tommy had found. Container 14A was clearly marked, along with dozens of other locations throughout the facility. Jake, what if the things Uncle Ray stored for these families are still here? Before Jake could answer, they heard the sound of a car door slamming outside. Cal moved to the window and saw a black sedan parked near the front gate. Two men in business suits were examining the fence, one pointing toward the office building. Friends of yours? Jake asked. Never seen them before. One of the men pulled out a phone and made a brief call. Even from the second floor, Cal could see the man's agitated gestures. After a few minutes, both men returned to their car and drove away, but not before the passenger took several photographs of the facility. This is getting complicated, Jake said. Cal closed the ledger carefully. We need to find out what's really down there. If Uncle Ray preserved all those family belongings, there could be people still looking for them. They spent the rest of the morning walking the port with the map, identifying the locations Uncle Ray had marked. Container 14A sat exactly where the map indicated, its exterior showing no signs of disturbance. But when Cal examined it more closely, he realized it wasn't a standard shipping container. The lock was different, older, more substantial, and the anchor and compass symbol was carved directly into the metal. "This isn't just storage," Cal said. "This is a vault." Jake examined the lock. "We'd need specialized tools to open this without damaging it. But Cal, if this contains what I think it does, personal belongings of refugee families from World War II. More than that, if these families were wealthy enough to flee Europe with valuable items, we could be talking about artwork, jewelry, documents that museums would pay millions for." Cal felt the weight of discovery settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about his financial struggles anymore. This was about honoring Uncle Ray's legacy and potentially reuniting families with treasures they'd thought lost forever. That evening, Cal told Tommy about the discovery while they ate dinner. His son listened with wide eyes as Cal explained about the refugee families and Uncle Ray's secret mission. "So, Uncle Ray was like a hero?" Tommy asked. "Yes, buddy, I think he was. And there might be treasure in the containers. Not treasure like pirates had, but things that were precious to families' photographs, jewelry, maybe artwork, things that meant everything to people who had to leave their homes." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he said, "We have to help them get their stuff back, don't we, Dad?" Cal smiled at his son's instinctive understanding of what was right. "Yes, we do." That night, after Tommy was asleep, Cal sat at the kitchen table with Uncle Ray's ledger spread before him. Each entry represented lives saved, families preserved, hope maintained during humanity's darkest hour. Uncle Ray hadn't just run a shipping port, had run a lifeline. But the presence of the mysterious visitors troubled Cal. Word was somehow getting out about the port's wartime secrets. If valuable items really were hidden in those containers, how long before more people came looking? And were they all going to be as interested in historical preservation as they claimed? Cal locked the ledger in his bedroom dresser and tried to sleep, but his mind kept racing. Uncle Ray had trusted him with more than just property. He'd trusted him with history, with the sacred responsibility of protecting other people's memories and heritage. Tomorrow, he would start the process of opening container 14A. Whatever he found inside would change everything, for better or worse. But tonight, he felt the presence of Uncle Ray's spirit and the weight of a promise he was only beginning to understand. The Riverside Historical Society occupied a converted Victorian mansion on the edge of downtown, its rooms filled with the careful accumulation of local memory. Cal found Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, the Society's president, cataloguing photograph donations in the main research room. "Mr. Mason," she said, looking up from a box of faded images, "I wondered when you might visit us. Your uncle was one of our most valued contributors over the years." Cal placed the wartime photograph on the table between them. "I'm hoping you can tell me more about this." Mrs. Whitman's eyes widened as she studied the image. "Oh my, I haven't seen this photograph in decades. Your uncle brought it to us in the 1980s, along with several others from the war period. He was very specific that we were only to display them with his permission." "Did he ever give that permission?" "No. He said the time wasn't right, that some stories needed to wait until the people involved were ready to tell them." She paused, studying Cal's face. "I assume that time has come?" Cal explained about the ledger and the marked containers. Mrs. Whitman listened with growing excitement, occasionally interrupting with questions that revealed her deep knowledge of local wartime history. The Safe Harbor Foundation was real, she confirmed, a network of private citizens who helped process refugees along the East Coast. Most of the records were sealed after the war, officially for security reasons. But there were rumors that some families had entrusted valuable items to Foundation members for safekeeping. She led Cal to a filing cabinet and withdrew a thick folder. "Your uncle donated these documents in 1987. maritime records, correspondence, even some immigration papers. I always suspected there was more to the story. Among the papers, Cal found correspondence between Uncle Ray and various refugee assistance organizations. Letters thanking him for his discretion and security in handling sensitive family assets, references to temporary custody, and future reunification when circumstances permit. Mrs. Whitman, do you know anything about a European historian who might be researching wartime shipping records? Her expression grew cautious. What kind of historian? Cal described the man Jake had mentioned. Mrs. Whitman's frown deepened. Mr. Mason, I've been in this business for 40 years. Legitimate historians don't make unannounced visits asking vague questions. They write letters, provide credentials, explain their research goals. What you're describing sounds more like... Like what? Like someone looking for something specific, something valuable. Cal felt a chill run down his spine. You think word has gotten out about what might be in those containers? I think your uncle was more careful than most people realized. If he preserved refugee belongings for 70 years, there's probably a very good reason they haven't been claimed yet. That afternoon, Cal met with Sarah Chen at the harbor coffee shop she'd suggested. He'd found her name in Uncle Ray's correspondence. Dr. Sarah Chen, Maritime Historical Research, University of Maine. Her letters to Uncle Ray dated back 15 years, consistently requesting interviews about wartime shipping operations. Sarah turned out to be a woman in her mid-30s, with the kind of intense focus that suggested she took her work seriously. She listened to Cal's story without interruption, taking occasional notes in a small leather journal. Your uncle never responded to my letters, she said when Cal finished. But now I understand why. He was protecting something much larger than I realized. Can you help me figure out how to handle this properly? If there really are family belongings in those containers, I want to make sure they get back to the right people. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. There are proper channels for this kind of discovery. International agencies that specialize in reuniting families with wartime losses. But the process can take years, and there are always people looking to profit from historical artifacts. What do you mean? Black market dealers, private collectors, even some museums that aren't too careful about provenance. World War II artifacts are extremely valuable, especially if they have documented histories. Cal felt the weight of responsibility settling heavier on his shoulders. So if word gets out, you'll have every treasure hunter and artifact dealer on the East Coast showing up at your door. Some of them won't be as polite as the man who visited your friend. They spent an hour discussing the proper procedures for documenting and preserving historical finds. Sarah offered to help with the authentication process, but warned that opening the containers would need to be done with extreme care. Whatever your uncle preserved has been sealed for 70 years, she explained. Exposure to air and light could damage delicate items immediately. We'd need proper preservation equipment, documentation, photography, climate-controlled storage. That sounds expensive. Very. But Mr. Mason, if these containers hold what I think they might, the historical value would be immeasurable. We could be talking about artwork, manuscripts, religious artifacts that represent entire cultures. Cal drove back to the port that evening with his mind spinning. The financial pressure of his daily life hadn't disappeared. The bills still needed paying, Tommy still needed new shoes, the rent was still due next week. But now there was something larger at stake, something that transcended his personal struggles. He found Tommy waiting on the apartment steps with his sketch pad, as had become their routine. Mrs. Chen waved from her kitchen window as they climbed into the truck. "Did you find out more about Uncle Ray's secret?" Tommy asked as they drove toward the harbor. "A little. It turns out he was helping a lot of families during the war. Families who had to leave their homes and come to America. Like refugees." Cal glanced at his son, sometimes surprised by the boy's understanding of complex concepts. Exactly like refugees. At the port, Tommy ran ahead to his favorite spot near the main crane, while Cal walked to container 14A. In the late afternoon light, the anchor and compass symbol seemed more prominent, as if Uncle Ray had carved it deep enough to withstand decades of weather. Cal placed his hand on the container's surface, feeling the solid steel beneath his palm. Somewhere inside was a piece of history that Uncle Ray had protected for 70 years. The trust implied in that preservation was overwhelming. "Dad, come look at this." Tommy's voice carried from near the old office building. Cal found his son crouched beside a brass object, partially buried in the gravel near the foundation. "It looks like a compass," Tommy said, brushing dirt away from the circular device. Cal knelt beside his son and carefully extracted the object. It was indeed a compass, but unlike any modern navigation instrument. The brass case was heavily tarnished, and strange markings surrounded the traditional directional indicators. But what caught Cal's attention was the familiar symbol engraved on the back, the same anchor and compass design from the containers. "Tommy, this is incredible. This might have belonged to someone Uncle Ray was helping." The compass needle still moved, though whether it was accurate after so many years was questionable. But as Cal turned it in his hand, he noticed something unusual. When pointed toward container 14A, the needle seemed to settle with unusual stability. "Dad, look." Tommy pointed to tiny numbers etched around the compass edge. 14, just like the container. Cal studied the markings more carefully. The numbers weren't random, they were coordinates, or perhaps a code that corresponded to Uncle Ray's hidden map. As they walked back toward the truck, Cal noticed a car parked on the road outside the port's front gate. The same black sedan from yesterday. This time, the driver made no attempt to hide his surveillance. When Cal made eye contact through the windshield, the man simply nodded and drove away. "Dad, who was that?" "I'm not sure, buddy, but I think we need to be more careful about who we talk to regarding Uncle Ray's secrets." That evening, Cal called Jake and described the day's discoveries. His friend's concern was immediate and practical. "Cal, you need to think about security. If valuable items really are hidden at that port and word is getting out, you could be putting yourself and Tommy at risk. What do you suggest?" "Document everything. Take photographs of the containers, the compass, Uncle Ray's ledger. Store copies somewhere safe. And maybe consider installing some basic security at the port cameras, better locks, something to discourage casual visitors." Cal spent the night researching maritime artifact recovery online. What he learned was both encouraging and troubling. Legitimate recovery operations involved teams of specialists, months of planning, and significant financial investment. But the potential rewards, both historical and monetary, were substantial enough to attract less scrupulous attention. By morning, Cal had made a decision. He would proceed with opening container 14A, but he would do it properly, with Sarah Chen's help and full documentation. Whatever Uncle Ray had preserved deserved to be handled with the respect and care it had received for 70 years. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. The mysterious compass suggested that Uncle Ray's system was more sophisticated than simple storage. If the markings on the compass corresponded to locations throughout the port, there might be far more hidden than Cal had initially realized. The weight of Uncle Ray's trust was becoming clearer. This wasn't just about preserving objects, it was about preserving the memory and dignity of families who had lost everything except what they could carry. And now, somehow, the responsibility for protecting that legacy had fallen to Cal. Sarah arrived at the port early Saturday morning with equipment that looked more suited to an archaeological dig than opening a shipping container. Climate monitors, preservation cameras, sample containers, and what appeared to be a small laboratory's worth of testing gear filled the back of her university van. "I've been thinking about this all week," she said as they unloaded the equipment. "If your uncle was as methodical as his records suggest, whatever's in that container has been preserved with extreme care." Cal had brought Tommy along, despite some reservations about exposing his son to whatever they might find. But the boy's connection to Uncle Ray and the port felt too important to ignore. "Can I help document everything?" Tommy asked, holding up his sketchpad with the serious expression he wore when discussing important matters. "Actually, yes," Sarah replied. "Sometimes fresh eyes see details that adults miss. Your drawings could be part of the official record." The process of opening container 14A took nearly 3 hours. Sarah insisted on measuring temperature and humidity levels before breaking the seal, documenting the container's exterior condition, and setting up proper lighting for photography. When the heavy doors finally swung open, Cal felt like he was opening a time capsule. The interior had been carefully organized into sections, each area marked with the same meticulous attention to detail Uncle Ray had shown in his ledger. The first section contained personal documents, sealed in waterproof containers. Sarah opened one carefully, revealing immigration papers, family photographs, and letters written in several European languages. The preservation was remarkable 70-year-old documents that looked like they'd been sealed yesterday. "My God," Sarah whispered, examining a family photograph. "Look at this." The image showed a well-dressed family standing in front of what appeared to be a substantial European home. The father wore a fine suit, the mother an elegant dress, and 2 children were dressed in clothing that spoke of comfort and privilege. On the back, someone had written, "Heinrich and Maria Goldstein, Vienna, 1938. May we find each other again in better times." Tommy leaned over Sarah's shoulder. "They look happy in the picture." "They do," Sarah agreed softly. "This was probably taken before they had to leave their home." The second section contained what Sarah identified as a resistance code book, a small, leather-bound volume, filled with symbols and notations that had helped coordinate escape routes across Europe. "This is incredibly rare," Sarah explained. "Most resistance materials were destroyed to protect the people involved. Your uncle must have obtained this from someone who trusted him completely." Cal picked up the code book carefully. The leather was worn smooth from handling, and several pages were marked with what appeared to be route maps and safe-house locations. As he flipped through it, a loose paper fell out, a letter written in English. "Ray, the last transport leaves Thursday. Heinrich asked me to give you this along with his family's things. He said if anything happens to them in America, someone should know their story. The coordinates in the book will lead you to the other locations. Trust no one else with this information. Father Murphy." "There are more locations," Cal said, showing the letter to Sarah. "Uncle Ray wasn't just preserving things here. There's a whole network." The third section contained the items that made Sarah gasp audibly. Wrapped in specially treated cloth were paintings, small but exquisite works that even Cal's untrained eye could recognize as valuable. A delicate landscape that might have hung in someone's living room. A portrait of a young woman with sad, knowing eyes. Religious artwork that spoke of generations of family history. "These aren't just valuable," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're priceless, not because of their monetary worth, but because they represent entire family legacies." Tommy was sketching furiously, trying to capture the careful arrangement of items in the container. "Dad, look at this." He showed Cal a drawing of the family photograph, but Tommy had added details: a small house in the background, children playing in a yard, a sense of life and joy that somehow came through in his 10-year-old interpretation. "That's beautiful, buddy." As they continued cataloging, Cal's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Mason, this is Victor Brennan from Peterson Development. I understand you've been conducting some interesting research at your property." Cal felt his stomach tighten. "I'm sorry, how did you—" "Word travels fast in a small community, Mr. Mason. I wonder if we might meet to discuss a revised offer for your property. I think you'll find our new terms very attractive." "Mr. Brennan, I've told your company repeatedly that the port isn't for sale. Mr. Mason, I think circumstances may have changed. We're prepared to offer $3 million, cash, with a 30-day closing. That's considerably more than the property's assessed value." $3 million. The number hit Cal like a physical blow. It was enough money to solve every financial problem he'd ever had, to set up Tommy's college fund, to buy them a real home instead of renting a cramped apartment. "I'll need to think about it," Cal heard himself saying. Of course. But Mr. Mason, I should mention that we're aware of your recent discoveries. While we're prepared to be generous, other parties might not be as accommodating. The line went dead. Cal stared at his phone, the implications of the conversation settling over him like a dark cloud. Dad? Tommy was looking at him with concern. You look funny. Sarah had overheard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. They know, she said simply. That afternoon, they secured the container and loaded Sarah's equipment back into her van. The documentation process had yielded incredible findings: over 24 items of clear historical significance, representing at least 6 different families. Cal, you need to understand what you're dealing with, Sarah said as they prepared to leave. Just the paintings we found today could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. If there are more containers like this one, how much are we talking about? Millions, possibly tens of millions. And that's just monetary value. The historical significance is immeasurable. On the drive home, Tommy was quieter than usual. Finally, he asked, Dad, are we going to sell Uncle Ray's port? Cal looked at his son in the rear-view mirror. What do you think we should do? I think Uncle Ray wanted us to help those families get their stuff back. The money people are trying to take that away from them. From the mouths of babes. Cal realized his 10-year-old son had grasped the moral complexity of the situation more clearly than most adults would. That evening, Cal received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Chen knocked on his door, looking more agitated than he'd ever seen the usually calm woman. Mr. Mason, men came asking about you today. Want to know about your work, your schedule, your son. Her broken English carried an urgency that needed no translation. They say they are researchers, but I know that look. They are hunters. Cal invited her in and made tea while she explained. 2 men had approached her while she was tending her small garden, claiming to be academic researchers interested in Cal's work at the port. But their questions had been personal, invasive, and had left Mrs. Chen with the impression that they were gathering information for purposes that had nothing to do with research. They ask when you leave for work, when boy comes home from school. This is not research questions. Cal felt a chill run through him. If people were watching his daily routine, gathering information about Tommy's schedule, the situation had moved beyond simple business pressure. After Mrs. Chen left, Cal called Jake. I think we have a problem, Cal said, and explained the day's events. Jake's response was immediate. Pack a bag for you and Tommy. You're staying with us tonight. Jake, I can't run every time someone makes inquiries. Cal, listen to me. If what you found today is as valuable as you think, and if word is getting out, you're not dealing with legitimate collectors anymore. You're dealing with people who see millions of dollars sitting in shipping containers, and the only thing standing between them and that money is one man and his 10-year-old son. Cal looked toward Tommy's bedroom, where his son was probably drawing pictures of the day's discoveries. The boy had already lost his mother. The thought of putting him in danger over containers of historical artifacts made Cal's decision easy. We'll be there in an hour. As Cal packed a bag for himself and Tommy, he thought about the families whose belongings they'd discovered. People who had fled persecution, carrying only what they could manage, trusting strangers like Uncle Ray to preserve the rest of their lives. They had faced much greater dangers than corporate pressure and anonymous watchers. But they had also paid a price for that courage. Cal was beginning to understand that preserving Uncle Ray's legacy might require the same kind of courage his uncle had shown 70 years ago. The difference was that Uncle Ray hadn't had a 10-year-old son to protect. Jake's house sat on 3 acres outside town, far enough from neighbors to provide privacy, but close enough to civilization to feel secure. Cal had spent many evenings here over the years, and Tommy loved the big backyard where he could run and explore. But tonight, the familiar comfort felt overshadowed by uncertainty. Sarah arrived an hour after Cal and Tommy had settled in, carrying a laptop and several thick folders. She'd spent the afternoon researching the names they'd found in container 14A, and her discoveries had shaken her more than she'd expected. The Goldstein family, she began, opening the laptop on Jake's kitchen table. Heinrich was a prominent art dealer in Vienna before the war. His gallery was seized by the Nazis in 1938, but according to these records, he managed to smuggle out several dozen pieces before fleeing to America. She showed them a website dedicated to tracking Nazi-looted art. Heinrich Goldstein's name appeared on multiple lists of dealers whose collections had been confiscated or destroyed. "What happened to the family?" Cal asked. Heinrich and Maria made it to New York in 1943. They lived in Queens, ran a small antique shop. Heinrich died in 1967, Maria in 1972. But here's the important part. They had 2 children who survived. David Goldstein is still alive. He's 83 years old and lives in Brooklyn. Cal felt his breath catch. One of the families is still alive. Not just alive. David Goldstein has been searching for his family's lost artwork for 40 years. He's worked with Holocaust recovery organizations, hired private investigators, even offered rewards. He never knew his parents had managed to save anything. Tommy looked up from his sketchpad. "So we can give him his family's stuff back?" "It's not that simple," Sarah continued. "There are legal procedures, authentication requirements, international laws governing recovered artifacts. But yes, ultimately, we could reunite David Goldstein with his family's belongings." Jake had been listening quietly, but now he leaned forward. "What about the other families? Are there more survivors?" Sarah flipped through her notes. "I've found preliminary information on 3 other families represented in that container. At least 2 have living descendants. One family, the Kowalskis from Polandas, a granddaughter who runs a small museum in Chicago dedicated to preserving Polish immigrant history. The implications were staggering. Uncle Ray hadn't just preserved object, she'd preserved the possibility of healing, of connection across generations and continents. But as Cal thought about David Goldstein searching for 40 years for traces of his family's heritage, he also thought about the men, asking Mrs. Chen questions about Tommy's schedule. "Sarah, if we go public with this discovery, if we start contacting families and working with recovery organizations, how long before everyone knows what's at the port?" "Not long. Holocaust recovery is a small community. Word would spread quickly, especially about a find this significant." Cal felt the weight of impossible choices. Keeping the discovery secret meant denying families the chance to reclaim their heritage. But going public might put Tommy in danger from people who saw only monetary value in Uncle Ray's preservation efforts. That night, after Tommy had fallen asleep in Jake's guest room, the 3 adults sat around the kitchen table trying to solve a puzzle with no clear solution. "There has to be a way to do this safely," Sarah insisted. "Legal channels, proper authorities, security measures." "How long would that take?" Cal asked. "Months, possibly years. International recovery cases move slowly, especially when valuable items are involved." Jake had been researching something on his phone. "Cal, I've been looking into Peterson Development. They're not just a local company. They're owned by a larger corporation that specializes in acquiring distressed properties. But here's the interesting part. Their parent company has connections to private art dealers and auction houses." Cal felt pieces clicking into place. "You think they know what's in those containers?" "I think someone tipped them off about the Wartime connection, and once they realized the potential value, they started applying pressure." Sarah's laptop chimed with an incoming email. She read it quickly, her expression growing concerned. "I've been in contact with the International Art Recovery Foundation about proper procedures for discoveries like this. They just sent me a warning. Apparently, there are rumors circulating in certain collector circles about a major wartime find on the East Coast." "How could rumors be circulating already? We just opened 1 container yesterday." "I don't know, but the Foundation is advising extreme caution. They've seen cases where premature publicity led to theft attempts, black market dealers, even violence." Cal looked toward the guest room where Tommy slept. The boy had no idea that his innocent excitement about Uncle Ray's secrets had thrust them into a world where people killed for art and artifacts. The next morning brought a call that changed everything. Cal's phone rang at 6 a.m., waking him from restless sleep on Jake's couch. "Mr. Mason, this is David Goldstein in Brooklyn. I understand you may have found something that belonged to my family." Cal sat up, fully awake. "Mr. Goldstein, how did you—" "The art recovery community is smaller than you might think, Mr. Mason. When word started circulating about a wartime discovery in Maine, certain people made certain phone calls. May I ask, did you find a family photograph? Heinrich and Maria Goldstein, Vienna, 1938? Cal's heart pounded. "Yes, sir, we did." There was a long pause. When David Goldstein spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Mr. Mason, I haven't seen a photograph of my parents in 70 years. The Nazis took everything when we fled. Everything except what my parents somehow managed to send ahead." "Your parents survived the war, Mr. Goldstein. They made it to America." "Yes, but they never spoke about what they'd lost. I think the pain was too great. They built a new life, but they never talked about the old one." Cal found himself explaining the discovery, Uncle Ray's preservation efforts, the careful cataloguing of belongings from multiple families. David Goldstein listened with the patience of someone who had waited decades for this conversation. "Mr. Mason, my father was an art dealer. Some of the pieces he owned were very valuable, but that's not why I've been searching for them. They were my family's history. My grandmother's jewelry, my mother's paintings, photographs of relatives I never met. When you lose everything, you realize that objects become memory." Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the conversation. Cal put the phone on speaker so the boy could hear David Goldstein's story. "Mr. Goldstein, there's something else. We found a locket yesterday, a small silver piece with a photograph inside. The coordinates were marked with your family's name." "A locket?" David's voice caught. "Could you describe it?" Sarah pulled out her documentation photos, and Cal described what they'd found. "It contains a photograph of a young woman, maybe in her 20s. Beautiful dark hair, wearing what looks like a wedding dress." David Goldstein began to cry. Even through the phone, they could hear the soft sounds of a man confronting memories he'd thought lost forever. "That was my sister Maria," he whispered. "She was named after our mother. She didn't make it out of Europe. That locket was her engagement gift from our father. I thought everything of hers was destroyed." The call lasted another hour. David Goldstein shared stories about his family, their life in Vienna before the war, his parents' struggles to rebuild in America. He also shared something more troubling, warnings about the people who might be interested in the discovery. "Mr. Mason, you need to understand that Holocaust artifacts have become big business. There are legitimate recovery efforts, but there are also people who see only profit. Some of them are not above intimidation, or worse, to get what they want." After the call ended, Cal felt the full weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about preserving history anymore, it was about protecting living people from exploitation. Sarah had been working on her laptop throughout the conversation. "Cal, I've been thinking about this wrong. We don't need to choose between secrecy and going public. There's a third option." "Which is?" "We work directly with the families, privately, carefully, with proper security measures. We bypass the official channels that might attract unwanted attention, at least initially." Jake nodded approvingly. Like Uncle Ray did during the war, he worked outside official channels because official channels weren't safe. "Exactly. We document everything. We work with legitimate recovery experts, but we keep it small and controlled until we can ensure everyone's safety." That afternoon, they returned to the port with a new plan. Instead of opening more containers immediately, they would focus on thoroughly documenting container 14A and establishing secure communication with the families they'd identified. But as they approached the port's main gate, Cal noticed something that made him brake suddenly. The lock on the gate had been cut. "Someone's been here," Jake said quietly. They parked outside the fence and walked the perimeter carefully. The damage was subtle but clear. Someone had entered the facility, probably during the night. Container 14A appeared undisturbed, but the office building showed signs of forced entry. Inside Uncle Ray's office, They found evidence of a careful search. File cabinets had been opened and searched, but nothing appeared to be missing. The hidden panel where Cal had found the ledger hung open, but since he'd already removed the documents, the intruders had found nothing. "Professional job," Jake observed. They knew what they were looking for. Sarah was examining the windowsill. "Look at this." She pointed to something caught on the window frame, a small piece of fabric, expensive-looking, like it might have come from a suit jacket. Tommy had wandered to his favorite spot near the main crane, but now he called back to them with excitement rather than concern. "Dad, come see what I found." Near the base of the crane, partially hidden in the tall grass, was another artifactor, small leather journal, its pages protected by what appeared to be a waterproof cover. The cover bore the same anchor and compass symbol they'd seen throughout the port. Cal opened it carefully. The entries were in English, but in different handwriting from Uncle Ray's ledger. September 12, 1943. Ray Mason is a man of extraordinary courage. The families arriving this week have entrusted him with treasures that represent generations of their heritage. I have seen him weep over photographs of children who did not survive the crossing. This work is not about money, it is about preserving the souls of people who have lost everything else. October 15, 1943. The final shipment arrived today. Heinrich Goldstein brought paintings his family has owned for 2 centuries. He wept as he placed them in Ray's care, saying they were all that remained of his father's legacy. Ray promised him that someday, when the world was safe again, these treasures would find their way home. The journal was signed Father Patrick Murphy, the same name from the letter they'd found in container 14A. A priest was helping Uncle Ray, Cal realized. This was bigger than just one man preserving artifacts. This was an organized effort. As they prepared to leave the port, Cal noticed the black sedan parked on the road again. This time, the driver didn't leave when spotted. Instead, he rolled down his window and made a phone call, his eyes never leaving Cal's truck. "We're being watched constantly now," Jake observed. That evening, Cal made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of staying at Jake's house, he loaded Tommy and their belongings into the truck and drove back to their apartment. "Are you sure about this?" Jake asked, helping them carry bags upstairs. "I can't run forever," Cal replied, "and I won't let fear keep me from doing what's right." But he also installed new locks on their doors and asked Mrs. Chen to be extra vigilant about strangers in the neighborhood. Whatever happened next, Cal was determined to face it head-on, with Tommy safely protected and Uncle Ray's legacy preserved. The locket Sarah had documented now sat in a safety deposit box at the bank, along with photographs and documentation of everything they'd found. David Goldstein's tears had reminded Cal that this treasure wasn't about money, it was about memory, family, and the sacred trust Uncle Ray had accepted 70 years ago. Tomorrow, they would contact more families. They would continue Uncle Ray's work, carefully and safely, but they would continue it, because some things were worth the risk. The master manifest was hidden in the last place. Cal would have thought to look inside the pages of a maritime safety manual that sat on Uncle Ray's desk, so ordinary that previous searchers had completely overlooked it. Tommy found it Tuesday morning while Cal was at his factory job, the boy's curiosity leading him to flip through every book in Uncle Ray's office. Sarah examined the document with the reverence of someone handling a piece of sacred text. "Cal, this changes everything. Your uncle didn't just preserve artifacts randomly. He created a comprehensive cataloging system that covers the entire port. The manifest listed 47 separate hiding places throughout the facility. Container 14A had been just the beginning. Underground storage areas, sealed sections in warehouse walls, even waterproof chambers built into the dock foundations themselves. Each location was coded with symbols that corresponded to the mysterious compass Tommy had found. "It's like a treasure map," Tommy said, tracing the symbols with his finger. "But instead of pirates' gold, it's people's memories." Cal studied the scope of Uncle Ray's operation with growing amazement. According to the manifest, Over 300 families had entrusted belongings to the port between 1941 and 1945. The estimated value, in $1,940, was already substantial. In today's market, the collection could be worth hundreds of millions. But the manifest contained something else that made Cal's blood run colder. Section marked security protocols that detailed Uncle Ray's concerns about post-war recovery efforts. Not all who seek these treasures will come with pure intentions, Uncle Ray had written. Some will see only profit where we have preserved love. The hiding places must remain secret until each family's circumstances can be verified and their safety assured. Sarah looked up from photographing the manifest pages. Your uncle knew this day would come. He anticipated that someday people would start looking for what he'd preserved. But 70 years later, how do we verify families' circumstances? How do we ensure their safety? Very carefully, Sarah replied, and with help. That afternoon, Sarah introduced Cal to her contact at the International Holocaust Memorial, Dr. Rebecca Stern, a genealogist who specialized in tracking displaced families and their descendants. Dr. Stern listened to their story via video call with the intensity of someone who understood the historical significance of the discovery. What you're describing could be the largest private collection of preserved refugee belongings ever discovered, Dr. Stern said. But you're absolutely right to be cautious. There are people who make careers out of exploiting Holocaust recovery efforts. She explained the authentication process, genealogical research to verify family connections, documentation of original ownership, legal procedures to ensure proper transfer of belongings. The work could take months or years per family. However, Dr. Stern continued, there are ways to begin the process privately, working with individual families before involving larger organizations. It's more time-consuming, but it might be safer for everyone involved. Cal made the decision that afternoon. They would begin with David Goldstein, using his case to establish proper procedures and security protocols. If they could successfully reunite one family with their heritage, they could develop a model for the others. But first, they needed to access more of the hiding places detailed in Uncle Ray's manifest, and that meant returning to the port despite the increasing surveillance. Jake arrived at 6 p.m. with equipment that would have impressed a professional security team: motion sensors, wireless cameras, and communication gear that would let them monitor the port's perimeter while they worked. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right, Jake said, loading the gear into Cal's truck. No more surprises from uninvited visitors. Tommy insisted on coming along, and Cal realized his son's presence might actually be an asset. The boy's familiarity with the port's layout and his talent for noticing details had already proven valuable. They arrived at the port after sunset, using the back entrance Jake had discovered during his security survey. The wireless cameras were positioned to monitor all approaches, with feeds sent directly to Jake's phone. Uncle Ray's manifest directed them to location B12, a sealed chamber built into the foundation of Warehouse 3. According to the notes, this location contained belongings from Polish and Czech families who had arrived in the winter of 1943. Finding the entrance required following clues that Uncle Ray had embedded in the warehouse's structure. A series of anchor symbols carved into support beams led to what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. But when Cal pressed on the third symbol from the left, a section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a space that had been hidden for 7 decades. The preservation was even better than Container 14A, climate-controlled and sealed from moisture. The chamber contained artifacts that looked like they had been placed there yesterday. Paintings wrapped in specially treated cloth, jewelry in custom-fitted cases, documents preserved in airtight containers. But it was the personal items that affected Cal most deeply. Children's toys, carefully preserved as if waiting for their young owners to return from a temporary separation. A wooden horse with worn paint from years of play. A small doll with hand-sewn clothes that spoke of a mother's love and care. Tommy discovered a collection of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Sarah translated one written in Policia, father's note, to his children, explaining that they were going on a long journey and that their favorite toys would be waiting for them in the new country. The children never made it, Sarah said quietly. According to the manifest, the transport ship was torpedoed by a German submarine 3 days out of Lisbon. Cal felt the weight of Uncle Ray's burden in that moment, not just preserving objects but carrying the hopes and dreams of families who never lived to reclaim them. They worked until midnight, documenting the chamber's contents and cross-referencing items with the families listed in Uncle Ray's records. By the time they secured the location and prepared to leave, they had identified belongings from 12 different families, representing what appeared to be several $1 million in artifacts. The drive home was quiet, each of them processing the magnitude of what they had discovered. But as they approached town, Jake's security monitoring system chimed with an alert. "Motion detected at the port," Jake announced, checking his phone. "Vehicle approaching the main gate." Cal pulled over, and they watched the live feed on Jake's screen. A white van was parked outside the port's entrance, and 2 figures were examining the fence line with flashlights. "Professional equipment," Jake observed. "Night vision, cutting tools. These aren't casual trespassers." They watched as the intruders cut through the fence and entered the port grounds. One headed directly for Container 14A, while the other moved toward the warehouse where they had been working. "They know exactly where to look," Sarah said. "Someone's been feeding them information." Cal felt anger rising in his chest. Uncle Ray had protected these treasures for 70 years, and now people were treating them like common loot to be stolen and sold. "Jake, can you call the police?" "Already on it," Jake replied, his phone already dialing. "But Cal, by the time they respond, these guys will be long gone." They drove back toward the port, staying far enough away to avoid detection, but close enough to monitor the situation. The intruders spent 40 minutes examining containers and warehouse entrances before leaving the same way they had arrived. "They're mapping the place," Jake said grimly. "Next time, they'll come prepared to take whatever they want." That night, Cal made a series of phone calls that would change everything. First to David Goldstein, explaining the escalating situation and asking for his help in developing a security plan. Then to Dr. Stern, requesting immediate assistance with establishing legal protections for the discovery. Finally, he called Peterson Development and left a message for Victor Brennan. "Mr. Brennan, this is Cal Mason. I understand you've been having trouble with trespassers at industrial properties in the Harbor District. Perhaps we should meet to discuss mutual security concerns." Cal knew he was taking a risk by engaging directly with Peterson Development. But if they were behind the surveillance and break-ins, it was time to confront the situation head-on. And if they weren't, they might be valuable allies in protecting the port. Tommy had fallen asleep during the drive home, his sketchpad filled with drawings of the evening's discoveries. Cal carried his son upstairs, tucking him into bed and taking a moment to watch the boy sleep peacefully, unaware of the dangerous game unfolding around Uncle Ray's legacy. As Cal prepared for bed, he thought about the children's toys they'd found in the warehouse chamber. Preserved with the same care as priceless artwork, Uncle Ray had understood that a child's wooden horse might be more valuable to a family than a Renaissance painting. The master manifest contained locations for 45 more hiding places. Each one represented families, stories, lives interrupted by history's cruelest chapter. Uncle Ray had accepted the responsibility of preserving not just their belongings, but their dignity and hope. Now that responsibility had passed to Cal, and whether he was ready or not, tomorrow would bring new challenges in protecting Uncle Ray's sacred trust. The video testament was hidden in the last place anyone would look inside, an old VHS tape labeled Port Safety Training 1987. Tommy found it while exploring Uncle Ray's desk drawers, the boy's natural curiosity leading him to wonder why his great-uncle had kept what appeared to be a boring instructional video. Cal almost dismissed it as exactly what the label suggested, but something about the careful way Uncle Ray had stored the tapa in a protective case, away from other materials, made him decide to watch it. Jake's house had an old VHS player in the basement, a relic from when his children were young. The four of them, Cal, Tommy, Jake, and Sarah, gathered around the small television as the tape began to play. At first, it seemed exactly like a safety training video. Uncle Ray appeared on screen in his work clothes, standing near the port's main crane, explaining proper loading procedures. But 10 minutes into the recording, Uncle Ray looked directly at the camera with an expression Cal had never seen before. "If you're watching this, then the time has come for the truth," Uncle Ray said. "My name is Raymond Mason, but that wasn't always my name. I was born Samuel Rosenberg in Berlin, Germany, in 1919. Cal felt the world shift beneath him. Uncle Ray Samuel continued speaking with the measured tone of a man who had carried secrets for decades. "I survived Bergen, Belsen concentration camp. My parents, my sister Rebecca, my younger brother David, they did not. When the Americans liberated the camp in April 1945, I weighed 87 pounds and had lost the ability to speak for 3 months. The camera remained fixed on Uncle Ray's face as he told a story that explained everything and changed everything. How he had been smuggled out of Germany by resistance fighters. How he had arrived in America with forged papers identifying him as Raymond Mason, the nephew of a Maine fishing family. How he had spent 2 years learning to be someone else before he felt safe enough to speak publicly. The port became my sanctuary," Uncle Ray continued. "But when families started arriving, Jewish families, Polish families, families fleeing the same horror I had survived, I realized my sanctuary could become theirs too." Tommy sat transfixed, his young mind processing the magnitude of Uncle Ray's revelation. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as the story unfolded. Jake gripped Cal's shoulder as they learned why Uncle Ray had been so committed to preserving other people's treasures. Every family that trusted me with their belongings was trusting a fellow survivor. I knew what it meant to lose everything, to have your history erased, to wonder if anyone would remember your family existed. I made a promise to each of them, their memories would be safe until they could reclaim them. Uncle Ray explained the preservation system, the careful cataloging, the security measures. But then he revealed something that made Cal's blood run cold. Not everyone who helped refugees during the war had pure motives. There were people who saw opportunity and desperation, who helped families escape only to steal their belongings once they were safely in America. I learned to recognize these predators, and I learned to protect the families from them. The video continued with Uncle Ray explaining how he had developed a network of trusted contacts, priests, doctors, other survivors, who helped verify the identities and circumstances of arriving families. How he had created false records to mislead anyone who might try to exploit the preservation system. Some of the families I helped were wealthy art dealers, jewelers, collectors who had managed to save portions of their collections. Others were ordinary people whose only treasures were family photographs and their grandmother's wedding ring. I treated all their belongings with equal care, because I understood that value isn't measured in money. But the most shocking revelation came in the final minutes of the recording. The coordinates in the Resistance Codebook don't just mark hiding places at the port, they mark a network of preservation sites along the entire East Coast. Ports in Boston, New York, Baltimore, Charleston, other survivors who continued the work after the war ended. The port in Maine was just one link in a chain that preserved the heritage of thousands of families. Uncle Ray looked directly into the camera with eyes that held 70 years of secrets. "Cal, if you're watching this, then you've inherited more than a shipping port. You've inherited a sacred trust that connects you to survivors across the country, to families across the world, and to a history that must never be forgotten." The video ended with Uncle Ray providing contact information for the other preservation sites, legal documents establishing the port as a historical preservation facility, and detailed instructions for working with international recovery organizations. For several minutes after the tape finished, no one spoke. The weight of Uncle Ray's revelation settled over them like a heavy blanket. "He was a Holocaust survivor," Tommy said finally, his voice small and awed. "Yes, buddy, he was. And he spent his whole life helping other people who went through the same thing. Yes. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness he brought to all matters involving Uncle Ray. Finally, he said, "No wonder he never talked about the war. It must have been too sad to remember." Sarah was reviewing the documents Uncle Ray had provided. "Cal, this changes the legal situation completely. The port isn't just private property anymore. It's a designated historical preservation site. That gives you certain protections under federal law." Jake was more practical. "It also makes you a bigger target. If this network really exists, if there are preservation sites with artifacts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, there are going to be a lot of people interested in exploiting that information." Cal thought about the break-ins, the surveillance, the increasing pressure from Peterson Development. They don't know about the video yet. They think we just stumbled onto some valuable containers. "But when word gets out about the scope of the operation," Sarah began. "When word gets out, Tommy becomes a target," Cal finished. "Anyone who wants to control this network will see him as leverage against me." The realization hit them all simultaneously. This wasn't just about preserving artifacts anymore. It was about protecting a living legacy that connected thousands of families to their lost heritage. And it was about protecting Tommy from people who would see a 10-year-old boy as an obstacle to be removed. Cal made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "We're going public," he announced. "Tomorrow, we contact every major news organization, every recovery foundation, every government agency that handles historical preservation. We make this so public that it becomes impossible for anyone to steal or exploit." "Cal, that's incredibly dangerous," Sarah protested. "Once this story breaks, you'll have treasure hunters, black market dealers, government agencies, and international recovery organizations, all descending on that port." "Good," Cal replied, "because we'll also have legitimate historians, legal protections, and public oversight. The one thing people like Peterson Development can't fight is public attention." Jake nodded slowly. "Transparency as protection. It's risky, but it might work." That night, Cal called David Goldstein and explained Uncle Ray's revelation. The elderly man listened in silence as Cal read portions of the video testament. "Samuel Rosenberg," David said when Cal finished. "I knew a Samuel Rosenberg in the camps. Young man, maybe 25, from Berlin. He helped organize food distribution among the prisoners. Could it have been Uncle Ray?" "It's possible. So many of us took new names after the war. Starting over meant becoming someone new, someone who hadn't lived through the horror." David's voice grew thoughtful. "Mr. Mason, if your uncle really was Samuel Rosenberg, then what he accomplished at that port is even more remarkable than you realize. He didn't just preserve belonging, she preserved hope. For survivors like me, knowing that someone understood our loss, someone who had lived through the same nightmare, was protecting our family heritage, that knowledge would have meant everything." Cal spent the rest of the night preparing for what would either be the salvation or destruction of Uncle Ray's legacy. He contacted reporters at the Portland Press-Herald, the Boston Globe, and the New York Times. He sent emails to the Holocaust Memorial Museum, the International Art Recovery Foundation, and the FBI's art crime team. By morning, the story would be out of his control, but it would also be out of reach of anyone who wanted to exploit it for personal gain. As Cal prepared for bed, he found Tommy sitting at the kitchen table, working on a new drawing. This one showed Uncle Ray Samuel as a young man in what appeared to be a concentration camp, helping other prisoners. But Tommy had drawn him with a small smile, as if even in the darkest place he had maintained hope. "I think Uncle Ray was the bravest person who ever lived," Tommy said without looking up from his drawing. Cal sat beside his son, studying the picture. "I think you're right, buddy." Tomorrow would bring chaos, attention, and challenges Cal couldn't even imagine. But tonight, he felt the presence of Uncle Ray's spirit, and the quiet satisfaction of a man who had spent 70 years keeping faith with the dead while protecting the living. The video testament had revealed the truth about Uncle Ray's identity, but more importantly, it had revealed the true scope of his courage and the sacred nature of the trust he had passed to Cal and Tommy. Whatever happened next, they would face it with the same courage Uncle Ray had shown in the concentration camps, in the refugee ships, and in the quiet decades he had spent preserving other people's hope. The Liberation Certificate sat in a safety deposit box at First National Bank, along with Uncle Ray's video testament and the Master Manifest. Cal had discovered it, tucked inside the Resistance Code book, an official document from the Allied Command, authorizing Samuel Rosenberg to establish and maintain a refugee assistance facility at the Mason family port. The certificate, dated September 1945, granted Uncle Ray legal authority to hold refugee belongings in trust for displaced persons pending their successful resettlement and verification of identity. It was signed by 3 Allied commanders and bore official seals that would hold up in any court of law. Sarah had spent the morning on the phone with legal experts, and her news was both reassuring and sobering. "The certificate gives you ironclad legal protection," she explained as they sat in the bank's conference room. "No one can challenge your right to control access to the preservation sites. But it also means you're now responsible for a collection that could be worth over $200 million. Cal felt the weight of that responsibility as he studied the document. Uncle Ray had carried this burden alone for 7 decades, never speaking about it, never asking for help, never revealing the magnitude of what he was protecting. Tommy sat beside him, sketching the Liberation Certificate with the careful attention he brought to all matters involving Uncle Ray. The boy understood, in his 10-year-old way, that they were now the guardians of something much larger than themselves. "Dad, if we're going to tell everyone about Uncle Ray's secret, shouldn't we make sure all the hiding places are safe first?" Cal looked at his son with pride. The boy had grasped the essential challenge they needed to secure the entire preservation network before going public. Jake arrived at noon with disturbing news. "I've been monitoring the port all morning. 3 different vehicles have conducted surveillance in the past 4 hours. Professional operations, coordinated timing. Someone's planning something big." Sarah had been working with Dr. Stern and the International Holocaust Memorial to establish proper procedures for the revelation. "We have teams ready to respond within hours of going public," she reported. "Legal experts, security personnel, authentication specialists. But Cal, once we announce this discovery, you'll have 48 hours, maybe less, before every treasure hunter and artifact dealer on the planet knows exactly where to find you." Cal had spent sleepless hours the night before developing a plan that would protect Tommy while honoring Uncle Ray's legacy. It was complex, risky, and would require perfect timing. "We're going to open every preservation site on the same day," Cal announced. "Document everything, photograph everything, transfer everything to secure storage. By the time the story breaks, there won't be anything left at the port for people to steal." "Cal, that's impossible," Sarah protested. "The manifest shows 47 separate locations. Even with a full team, it would take weeks to properly document and remove everything." "Not if we focus on the most valuable items first," Cal replied, spreading the Master Manifest across the conference table. Uncle Ray coded each location by significance. Red symbols for the highest value items, blue for personal belongings, green for documents. "We start with red, work our way down." Jake studied the map. "How many red locations are there?" 12. "If we work through the night, with proper equipment and enough people, we could secure the most critical items in 18 hours. Sarah was already making calculations. "We'd need specialized moving equipment, climate-controlled storage, security escorts. That's a major operation requiring significant resources." Cal pulled out his phone and made a call that would determine whether his plan was feasible. "Mr. Goldstein, it's Cal Mason. I need your help with something that's going to sound impossible." David Goldstein listened as Cal explained the scope of Uncle Ray's preservation network and the urgent need to secure it before going public. When Cal finished, there was a long pause. "Mr. Mason, what you're describing is the largest private Holocaust artifact recovery operation in history. The coordination alone would require expertise and resources that you have access to through your work with recovery organizations. Cal interrupted. Mr. Goldstein, I'm not asking you to do this for free. I'm asking you to help me do it right. Another pause. Then, I'll make some calls. Give me 2 hours. While they waited for David Goldstein's response, Cal took Tommy home to pack bags for what might be several days away from their apartment. The boy approached the task with the seriousness of someone who understood they were embarking on something historic. Dad, are we going to meet other families like Mr. Goldstein? Probably, buddy. Families who've been waiting a long time to find pieces of their history. Tommy packed his sketchpad and art supplies, but also something that surprised Kayla, small framed photograph of Uncle Ray that had sat on the boy's nightstand since the funeral. I want Uncle Ray to see what we're doing, Tommy explained. Even if he's not here anymore, I think he'd want to watch. David Goldstein called back with news that exceeded Cal's most optimistic expectations. Through his connections with recovery organizations, he had assembled a team of specialists who could begin operations immediately. Art recovery experts, document preservation technicians, security personnel, trained in protecting high-value historical artifacts. There's more, David continued. The Holocaust Memorial Museum is prepared to provide temporary storage and authentication services. The FBI's art crime team will provide security during the transfer operation. And Mr. D0, Mason, 3 other families whose belongings are documented in your uncle's manifest have offered to fund the entire operation. Cal felt emotions he couldn't name. Why would they do that? Because some things are more important than money, Mr. Mason. Because for 70 years, families have wondered what happened to their heritage. Because your Uncle Samuel gave us hope when we thought hope was lost forever. The team began arriving at the port that evening. Professional moving trucks, specialized climate control equipment, security personnel who moved with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to protecting priceless artifacts. Dr. Rebecca Stern arrived from the Holocaust Memorial Museum with authentication equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. But the most important arrival was David Goldstein himself. At 83, he moved carefully but with purpose, his eyes bright with anticipation as he approached the port where his family's belongings had waited for 7 decades. Cal met him at the main gate, and for a moment, neither man spoke. They were standing where Heinrich and Maria Goldstein had entrusted their family's treasures to a young concentration camp survivor who promised to keep them safe. Samuel kept his promise, David said finally. Yes, sir, he did. The operation began at sunset. Using Uncle Ray's master manifest and the mysterious compass as guides, teams moved through the port with military precision. Container 14A was emptied first, its contents carefully catalogued and transferred to climate-controlled storage. Tommy served as Cal's assistant, using his familiarity with the port's layout to guide teams to hidden entrances and concealed storage areas. The boy's excitement was infectious, and Cal watched team members smile as Tommy explained Uncle Ray's preservation system with 10-year-old enthusiasm. Location B12 yielded the children's toys they had discovered earlier, along with artwork and documents that made Dr. Stern gasp with recognition. These are from the Kowalski collection, she announced. We've been trying to trace these pieces for 30 years. Location C7, hidden beneath the main dock, contained what appeared to be an entire jewelry store's worth of precious items. Engagement rings, family heirlooms, ceremonial objects that spoke of religious traditions preserved across generations. But it was location R14 marked, with the brightest red symbol on Uncle Ray's map, that yielded the discovery that would make international headlines. Hidden in a specially constructed vault beneath the port's office building was a collection of artwork that took Dr. Stern's breath away. My God, she whispered, examining a small painting with her magnifying glass. This is a Degas, and this is a Picasso from his blue period. The vault contained 47 paintings, representing millions of dollars in artistic value. But more importantly, Each piece was carefully documented with the family that had entrusted it to Uncle Ray's care. As dawn broke over the harbor, the last items were loaded into the final transport truck. 12 hours of careful work had successfully relocated over 3,000 artifacts to secure storage, where they would await authentication and eventual return to their families. Cal stood at the edge of the empty dock, exhausted but satisfied. The port looked the same as it had that morning 6 months ago when he first inherited it. But everything had changed. Sarah approached with news that the story would break in 4 hours. The New York Times is running the lead article. The BBC, CNN, and every major news organization will pick it up within minutes. Tommy appeared beside them, his sketchpad filled with drawings of the night's work. "Dad, look what I drew." The picture showed the port as it had been during the night, alive with purpose, people working together to preserve history, Uncle Ray's legacy finally revealed to the world. "Uncle Ray would be proud," Tommy said confidently. Cal looked at his son, then at the empty port that had safeguarded $200 million worth of artifacts for 7 decades. In a few hours, the world would know Uncle Ray's story. But right now, in this quiet moment before the storm, Cal felt something he hadn't experienced since Maria's death, a sense of purpose that transcended his own struggles. David Goldstein joined them at the dock's edge, moving slowly but with dignity. In his hands, he carried a small wooden box that had been among the first items recovered from container 14A. "Mr. Mason, I wanted to show you something before the chaos begins," David said, opening the box carefully. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a simple brass key, but attached to it was a small tag with an address in Brooklyn written in Uncle Ray's careful handwriting. "My parents' shop," David explained, his voice thick with emotion. "They kept the key all their lives, hoping someday they might return to Vienna and unlock the door to their old life. When they died, I kept it as a reminder of everything they'd lost." He held the key up to the morning light. "But now I understand. They weren't keeping it to look backward. They were keeping it to pass forward, to remind their children and grandchildren that home isn't a place you lose. It's something you carry with you and create wherever you are." Tommy listened, with the intensity he brought to all stories about families and their treasures. "Are you going to keep the key, Mr. Goldstein?" David smiled at the boy. "No, Tommy, I'm going to give it to my granddaughter, along with the photographs and paintings your Uncle Ray preserved. She's starting a family of her own now. It's time for her to understand where she comes from." As they prepared to leave the port, Cal received a call that confirmed his decision to go public had been the right one. "Mr. Mason, this is Agent Patricia Williams, FBI Art Crime Team. We've been monitoring unusual activity around your property for the past week. 3 separate criminal organizations have been planning to raid your facility. By removing the artifacts when you did, you may have prevented a significant theft operation." Cal felt a chill run through him. How did they know what was there? "We're still investigating, but it appears someone with access to European art recovery databases has been tracking rumors about wartime preservation sites. Your port was on a list of potential targets." The agent continued with information that made Cal grateful for David Goldstein's security arrangements. "We've arrested 4 individuals in connection with the planned theft. But Mr. Mason, going public was the smartest thing you could have done. Criminal organizations can't profit from artifacts that are under international scrutiny." As they drove away from the port, Cal watched the place recede in his rearview mirror. The cranes stood silent again, the warehouses empty, the docks clear of activity. But the port's most important chapter was just beginning. The story broke at noon, exactly as Sarah had predicted. Holocaust survivors' secret, main port preserved, 200 million in refugee artifacts for 70 years. Within minutes, Cal's phone began ringing with calls from reporters, historians, and government officials. But the call that mattered most came from Chicago. "Mr. Mason, this is Anna Kowalski-Chen. I believe you found my grandmother's jewelry box." Cal recognized the name from Uncle Ray's manifest. "Miss Kowalski-Chen, yes. Your family's belongings are safe, and will be returned to you as soon as authentication is complete. Mr. Mason, I don't care about authentication. I care about the man who preserved them. My grandmother died when I was 12, but she used to tell me stories about a port in Maine where a kind man promised to keep our family's treasures safe until we could come back for them. She never stopped believing that promise would be kept. Anna's voice broke with emotion. She's been gone for 20 years, but somehow she knew. She knew someone was protecting what mattered most to our family. By evening, the full scope of Uncle Ray's network was beginning to emerge. Recovery teams in Boston, New York, and Baltimore had confirmed the existence of additional preservation sites operated by other Holocaust survivors who had continued the work after the war. Dr. Stern arrived at Jake's house with preliminary estimates that staggered everyone. Over 5,000 families, preserved artifacts worth an estimated $500 million, stored across 7 different sites. It's the largest private recovery operation in Holocaust history. But for Cal, the numbers mattered less than the phone calls. Family after family, calling to say thank you. Grandchildren of refugees, learning for the first time that pieces of their heritage had survived. Children who had grown up wondering about their family's history, now discovering that their grandparents' most precious belongings had been carefully preserved by a stranger who understood loss. Tommy fell asleep that night surrounded by thank you cards that had already begun arriving. Drawings from other children, photographs from families, letters from people around the world expressing gratitude for Uncle Ray's courage and Cal's decision to honor his legacy. As Cal prepared for bed, he found Sarah sitting at Jake's kitchen table, working on her laptop. "The authentication process will take months," she reported, "but we've already confirmed the identities of over 60 families whose belongings were preserved. The reunification ceremonies are going to be extraordinary." Cal sat beside her, exhausted but oddly energized. "Sarah, I need to ask you something. Through all of this, you've never asked for anything. Why?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, then opened her laptop to a photograph. It showed a young Asian woman standing beside an elderly Jewish man outside what appeared to be a maritime museum. "That's my grandmother and David Goldstein's brother, taken in 1952. My family came to America as refugees from China. David's family helped us get established in New York. They shared their experience, their connections, their understanding of what it meant to rebuild your life in a new country." She closed the laptop and looked at Cal directly. Uncle Ray wasn't the only person who understood that helping refugees meant preserving their dignity, along with their belongings. There were networks of people who looked out for each other, who shared resources and knowledge and hope. And you're continuing that tradition. We all are. You, Tommy, Jake, everyone who's helped with this discovery. Uncle Ray's legacy isn't just about the artifacts he preserved. It's about the community he built around the idea that everyone deserves to keep their history, their identity, their connection to the people who came before them. Cal thought about the families who had called throughout the day, the emotion in their voices when they learned their heritage had survived. Uncle Ray had given them more than their belongings. Back he had given them proof that their families had mattered, that their losses had been witnessed, that their stories would not be forgotten. Tomorrow would bring more media attention, legal proceedings, authentication ceremonies, and challenges Cal couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, he felt the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept, a trust honored, and a legacy preserved for future generations. The Liberation Certificate sat in its safety deposit box, official validation of what Uncle Ray had spent 70 years proving through his actions that preserving hope requires courage, that protecting dignity demands sacrifice, and that some responsibilities transcend individual lives to become sacred trusts passed from one generation to the next. The golden menorah emerged from the deepest vault, like a beacon of light, cutting through 7 decades of darkness. Cal held his breath as Dr. Stern carefully lifted the ceremonial piece from its protective wrapping, its 7-branched form catching the morning sunlight that filtered through the warehouse windows. "This is extraordinary, Doctor," Stern whispered, examining the intricate engravings on the menorah's base. Late 18th century, probably from a synagogue in Prague or Vienna. The craftsmanship is museum quality. But it was Tommy who noticed the detail that made the discovery truly remarkable. "Dad, look! There are names carved on the bottom." Cal knelt beside his son as Dr. Stern tilted the menorah to reveal tiny Hebrew letters etched into the base. Sarah was already photographing the inscription when her phone rang. "Dr. Stern, this is Rabbi David Morrison from Temple Beth Shalom in New York. I'm calling about the menorah you discovered at the main preservation site." Dr. Stern put the phone on speaker. "Rabbi Morrison, how did you—" The news reports mentioned a ceremonial menorah among the artifacts. "Dr. Stern, my congregation has been searching for that piece for 40 years. It was stolen from our original synagogue building in 1943, along with several other sacred items." Cal felt a chill run through him. "Rabbi Morrison, the inscription on the base can, you describe it?" 7 names in Hebrew, the founding families of our congregation, engraved when the menorah was commissioned in 1887. "Dr. Stern, that menorah isn't just valuable, it's sacred. It represents 4 generations of our community's spiritual life." As Dr. Stern read the Hebrew names aloud, Rabbi Morrison confirmed each one. The menorah hadn't been stolen by Nazis, it had been rescued by members of the congregation who entrusted it to Uncle Ray's preservation network. "Rabbi Morrison," Cal said, "the menorah will be returned to your congregation as soon as authentication is complete. Mr. Mason, I can't express what this means to us. When sacred objects are lost, it's like losing a piece of our community's soul. To know that it's been preserved, protected, waiting for us to reclaim it." The rabbi's voice broke with emotion. But their moment of triumph was interrupted by Jake's urgent voice from outside the warehouse. "Cal, we have a problem." Cal stepped outside to see 3 black SUVs parked at the warehouse entrance. Men in expensive suits were examining the building's exterior, taking photographs and making notes. At the center of the group stood Victor Brennan from Peterson Development, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a man Cal recognized from Sarah's research, Marcus Webb, a private art dealer with connections to black market sales and questionable acquisition practices. The third man was a stranger, but his bearing and the deference shown by the others suggested he was the person in charge. "Mr. Mason," Brennan called out as he approached, "I'd like you to meet my associate, Dr. Heinrich Volkov. Dr. Volkov represents several private collectors who are very interested in your recent discoveries." Dr. Volkov stepped forward with the cold smile of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Mr. Mason, I understand you've been somewhat naive about the value of what you've discovered. We're prepared to offer you $50 million for immediate transfer of all artifacts currently in your possession." Cal felt anger rising in his chest. "Dr. Volkov, these artifacts belong to families who entrusted them to my uncle's care. They're not for sale to private collectors." "Mr. Mason, you seem to misunderstand the situation. These artifacts have been abandoned for 70 years. International law is quite clear about ownership of abandoned property." Sarah emerged from the warehouse, her expression grim. "Actually, Dr. Volkov, international law is quite clear about artifacts held in trust for displaced persons. The Liberation Certificate establishes legal guardianship that supersedes any abandonment claims." Dr. Volkov's smile never wavered. "Dr. Chen, I'm familiar with your work in maritime archaeology. You, of all people, should understand that legal documents from 1945 may not hold up in modern courts, especially when challenged by parties with substantial resources. It was a threat disguised as legal advice, and everyone present understood the implications. Dr. Volkov represented people with enough money and influence to tie up the artifacts in legal proceedings for years, potentially preventing families from ever reclaiming their heritage. But before Cal could respond, Tommy appeared in the warehouse doorway, still holding the golden menorah. "Dad, Rabbi Morrison wants to talk to you again." Dr. Volkov's eyes fixed on the menorah with the intensity of a predator spotting prey. "Ah, The Temple Beth Shalom menorah. Mr. Mason, that piece alone is worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. It belongs to the synagogue, Cal said firmly. It belongs to whoever has legal title, Mr. Mason, and legal title can be a very complex matter when artifacts have been held privately for 70 years. Rabbi Morrison's voice came through Sarah's phone, which was still connected from their earlier conversation. Dr. Volkov, this is Rabbi David Morrison. I've been listening to your conversation, and I think you should know that Temple Beth Shalom's legal team is very experienced in handling artifact recovery cases. Dr. Volkov's confident expression flickered for just a moment. Rabbi Morrison, I'm sure your congregation would prefer to avoid costly legal proceedings. We're prepared to offer the synagogue a substantial finder's fee in exchange for clear title to the menorah. Dr. Volkov, we're not interested in selling our congregation's sacred objects to private collectors. And I should mention that our legal team includes specialists in international Holocaust recovery law. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with Dr. Volkov alternating between legal threats and financial offers. But Cal realized that the man's presence meant the situation had escalated beyond simple business pressure. Dr. Volkov, how did you know we'd be at this warehouse today? The location hasn't been made public. Dr. Volkov's smile became predatory. Mr. Mason, when artifacts worth hundreds of millions of dollars are involved, information has a way of becoming available to interested parties. Jake stepped closer to Cal, his voice low. We're being watched. Has been all morning. Black sedan parked across the street, van at the corner. This isn't a business meeting, it's a setup. Cal felt the pieces clicking into place. The warehouse was isolated, away from the main port facility where media attention was focused. Dr. Volkov had brought enough people to outnumber Cal's small group. And Tommy was holding one of the most valuable artifacts they'd discovered. Tommy, go back inside with Dr. Stern, Cal said quietly. But Dr. Volkov stepped forward, blocking Tommy's path to the warehouse door. Actually, Mr. Mason, I think your son should stay. Children have such interesting perspectives on valuable objects. It wasn't a request, it was a threat. And Cal realized that Dr. Volkov had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Dr. Volkov, you just threatened my son. Mr. Mason, I simply suggested. Cal's phone was already dialing 911, but Dr. Volkov moved faster than Cal expected. The man grabbed Tommy's arm, trying to take the menorah. But Tommy held on with the determined grip of a 10-year-old who understood the artifact's importance. Let go of my son, Cal said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made even Dr. Volkov hesitate. What happened next would become part of the legend that grew around Uncle Ray's legacy. Tommy, still clutching the menorah, looked directly at Dr. Volkov and said words that came from somewhere deeper than his 10 years of experience. Uncle Ray didn't keep these things safe for 70 years, so people like you could steal them. They belong to families who lost everything, and you can't have them. The clarity and courage in Tommy's voice seemed to surprise everyone, including Dr. Volkov. But it also triggered something in the man that revealed his true nature. You little, Dr. Volkov began, raising his hand toward Tommy. He never completed the gesture. Cal moved with a father's protective instinct, placing himself between Dr. Volkov and his son. Jake appeared at Cal's shoulder, his own protective instincts engaged. Sarah positioned herself to shield Dr. Stern and the other artifacts. The confrontation was building toward violence when the sound of sirens filled the air. Multiple police cars, FBI vehicles, and what appeared to be a news van converged on the warehouse location. Dr. Volkov released Tommy immediately, his confident demeanor evaporating as he realized the situation had shifted dramatically against him. Agent Patricia Williams emerged from the lead FBI vehicle with the purposeful stride of someone who had been tracking this confrontation for hours. The family photograph collection emerged from the final preservation site, like a treasure chest of memories spanning continents and generations. Cal watched as Dr. Stern carefully opened the climate-controlled container that had protected hundreds of family photographs for 7 decades. each image a testament to Uncle Ray's understanding that sometimes the most valuable artifacts aren't made of gold or canvas, they're made of love. Agent Williams had arrived just in time to witness Dr. Volkov's attempted intimidation of Tommy, and her response was swift and professional. "Dr. Heinrich Volkov, you're under arrest for attempted theft of historical artifacts and threatening a minor during a federal investigation." As handcuffs clicked around Dr. Volkov's wrists, his carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. These artifacts belong in private collections where they can be properly appreciated, not locked away in dusty museums or returned to families who don't understand their true value." Agent Williams paused in reading Dr. Volkov his rights. "Dr. Volkov, these artifacts belong to the families who entrusted them to Samuel Rosenberg's care. Your appreciation of their value is irrelevant to their legal ownership." Victor Brennan and Marcus Webb were also taken into custody, their involvement in the intimidation scheme making them accessories to Dr. Volkov's crimes. As they were led away, Brennan made one final attempt to justify their actions. "Mason, you don't understand what you've done. These artifacts could have been sold privately, quietly, without all this publicity. Now every treasure hunter and black market dealer in the world knows where to find you." Cal watched the law enforcement vehicles drive away, taking with them the immediate threat to his family's safety. But Brennan's words carried an uncomfortable truth: going public had protected the artifacts, but it had also made Cal and Tommy permanent targets for anyone who saw Holocaust recovery as a profit opportunity. Tommy still clutched the golden menorah, but now he held it with the calm confidence of someone who had faced down adult predators and refused to be intimidated. "Dad, are there more bad people like Dr. Volkov?" "Probably, buddy, but there are a lot more good people like Rabbi Morrison and Dr. Stern and Mr. Goldstein." Dr. Stern was documenting the photograph collection with the reverence she brought to all aspects of the recovery process. Each image was carefully preserved, digitally scanned, and cross-referenced with the families listed in Uncle Ray's master manifest. "Cal, this collection represents something extraordinary," Dr. Stern explained as she worked. "Wedding photographs, family portraits, children's pictures, these are the images that families grabbed when they had to flee their homes. They're not financially valuable, but they're irreplaceable." Among the photographs, they found images that told the complete story of families' journeys. Pictures taken in European homes before the war, followed by images from refugee ships, then photographs from their new lives in America. The progression showed the resilience of people who had lost everything but refused to lose hope. One photograph particularly affected Tommy. It showed a boy about his age, standing beside a ship's railing with the Statue of Liberty visible in the background. On the back, someone had written, "David's first sight of America, July 1943. May he grow up free." "That's Mr. Goldstein when he was my age," Tommy realized. Dr. Stern confirmed the identification. David Goldstein, arriving in New York aboard the refugee ship Manhattan Morning. This photograph was taken by a volunteer documenting refugee arrivals for historical purposes. Cal studied the image of young David Goldstein, seeing in the boy's expression the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that he recognized in Tommy's face when confronting new challenges. The connection between past and present felt profound. Two boys, 70 years apart, both affected by the legacy of Uncle Ray's courage. Sarah was coordinating with international recovery organizations, and her updates revealed the global scope of interest in the discovery. Recovery teams from 6 countries are requesting access to the documentation. "We've identified families in Israel, Canada, Australia, and South America whose belongings were preserved in the network." But the most meaningful moment came when Rabbi Morrison arrived at the warehouse to personally receive the golden menorah. The elderly rabbi approached the artifact with tears in his eyes, his hands trembling as he touched the ceremonial piece his congregation had thought lost forever. "Samuel Rosenberg," Rabbi Morrison said softly, addressing Uncle Ray's memory, "you kept faith with us when we thought faith was impossible. You preserved not just our menorah, but our connection to generations of worship, celebration, and community. Tommy watched the reunion between Rabbi and menorah with the intensity he brought to all matters involving faith and family. Rabbi Morrison, are you going to light the menorah again? Yes, Tommy. Tomorrow night begins Hanukkah, the festival of lights. We'll kindle this menorah in our synagogue for the first time in 70 years. Would you and your father like to join us for the ceremony? Cal felt emotion tighten his throat. Rabbi Morrison, we'd be honored. As they prepared to transfer the final artifacts to secure storage, Agent Williams briefed Cal on the broader investigation that Dr. Volkov's arrest had revealed. Your discovery has exposed an international network of black market dealers who specialize in Holocaust artifacts. Dr. Volkov was just one node in a larger organization that's been operating for decades. How many people were involved? We're still investigating, but we've identified at least 12 individuals in 6 countries. The financial scope is staggering. They've been illegally acquiring and selling Holocaust artifacts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Agent Williams explained that Cal's decision to go public and work with legitimate recovery organizations had disrupted the entire black market network. By establishing legal ownership and international oversight, you've made it impossible for these artifacts to be sold illegally. Every piece is now documented, photographed, and legally protected. As the final boxes were loaded for transport to permanent storage facilities, Cal reflected on the magnitude of what they had accomplished. In 72 hours, they had successfully preserved and documented Uncle Ray's entire preservation network, prevented its exploitation by criminals, and begun the process of reuniting hundreds of families with their lost heritage. But the most important achievement was sitting beside him in the truck as they drove home, Tommy, sketching pictures of the day's events, his natural courage strengthened by having faced real danger and refused to be intimidated. Dad, I'm proud of Uncle Ray, Tommy said without looking up from his drawing, and I'm proud of us for keeping his promise. Cal looked at his son's latest drawing, a picture of the golden menorah surrounded by photographs of families, with Uncle Ray's spirit watching over everything like a guardian angel. The boy had captured something essential about the day's events that all the official documentation would miss: the spiritual dimension of preserving hope across generations. That evening, David Goldstein called with news that would complete Uncle Ray's legacy in ways none of them had anticipated. Cal, I've been in contact with the other preservation sites in the network. We're establishing the Samuel Rosenberg Foundation for Holocaust Recovery, a permanent organization, to continue the work your uncle started. What does that mean? It means families will have a central resource for recovering lost artifacts. It means researchers will have access to the network's documentation. It means Uncle Ray's preservation system becomes a model for future recovery efforts. And Cal, it means you and Tommy will always have support for protecting what Uncle Ray entrusted to your care. As Cal tucked Tommy into bed that night, the boy asked one final question about the day's events. Dad, do you think Uncle Ray knows what we did today? Cal thought about the courage they had shown, the threats they had faced, the families they had served, and the legacy they had preserved. I think he knows, buddy, and I think he's proud of us. Tommy smiled and closed his eyes, his sketch pad filled with images of menorahs and photographs and families reunited with their heritage. Outside, the harbor fog rolled in from the ocean, but inside their small apartment, Cal felt the warmth of a promise kept and a trust honored across the generations. 6 months later, the bronze plaque gleamed in the morning sunlight as Cal and Tommy stood before the renovated entrance to what was now officially known as the Raymond Mason Memorial Port. The inscription read simply, "Where courage found safe harborer, preservation site of the Samuel Rosenberg Holocaust Recovery Network, 1941-2015. The port bustled with activity again, but this time the cargo was different. Instead of commercial freight, the facility processed arriving artifacts from other preservation sites, coordinated family reunification ceremonies, and hosted researchers from around the world studying Uncle Ray's preservation methods. Tommy, now 11 and several inches taller, served as an unofficial tour guide for visiting families. His natural enthusiasm and deep knowledge of Uncle Ray's story made him the perfect ambassador for the memorial's mission. This morning, he was leading a group of schoolchildren through the main exhibit hall, which had been constructed in Warehouse 3. Uncle Ray wasn't my real uncle, Tommy explained to the children as they gathered around a display case containing the golden menorah. But he was family to hundreds of people who needed someone to protect their most important things. Sometimes family isn't just about blood, it's about caring for each other when times are hard. Cal watched from across the hall, pride swelling in his chest as he listened to his son articulate concepts that many adults struggled to understand. The boy had grown not just physically over the past months, but emotionally and intellectually, shaped by his role as guardian of Uncle Ray's legacy. Sarah approached, with a tablet displaying the morning's statistics. As the memorial's chief historian, she tracked the ongoing reunification efforts with the same meticulous attention Uncle Ray had brought to preservation. 37 families have been reunited with their belongings so far this month, Sarah reported. We've got authentication ceremonies scheduled through the end of the year, and the waiting list keeps growing as word spreads through recovery organizations. The memorial had become a model for Holocaust recovery efforts worldwide. Universities sent students to study the preservation techniques. Government agencies consulted on policy for handling historical discoveries. Most importantly, families from around the globe made pilgrimages to the place where their heritage had been safely kept for decades. Mrs. Chen had become the memorial's unofficial grandmother, arriving each morning with homemade cookies for visitors and maintaining a small garden near the main entrance where families often sat to process the emotional impact of reclaiming their belongings. Her limited English had never been a barrier to expressing the compassion that made traumatic reunifications healing rather than re-traumatizing. Jake had left his regular job to serve as the memorial's security director, using his military experience to ensure that families could visit safely while protecting the remaining artifacts awaiting authentication. The threats from black market dealers hadn't disappeared with Dr. Volkov's arrest, but professional security and international oversight made criminal interference much more difficult. David Goldstein arrived that afternoon for the memorial's monthly board meeting, moving more slowly than he had 6 months earlier, but still sharp and engaged. At 84, he had become the memorial's spiritual leader, sharing his perspective as both a Holocaust survivor and someone who had lived to see his family's treasures recovered. Cal, I have news that I think Uncle Ray would appreciate, David announced as they walked toward the conference room. The Samuel Rosenberg Foundation has been contacted by preservation sites in Europe. Apparently, the network was larger than even Uncle Ray knew. Cal felt the familiar mixture of excitement and responsibility that accompanied each expansion of their understanding of Uncle Ray's work. How much larger? Preliminary research suggests preservation sites in 7 European countries, operated by resistance networks that continued functioning after the war ended. We may be looking at a recovery operation involving thousands of families and tens of thousands of artifacts. The scope was staggering, but Cal had learned to approach Uncle Ray's legacy one family at a time, one artifact at a time, one story at a time. The memorial's success had come from treating each reunification as sacred rather than trying to process discoveries like industrial operations. Rabbi Morrison joined them for the board meeting, representing the religious organizations that had become key partners in the recovery efforts. The Temple Beth Shalom menorah had become a symbol of successful recovery, and Rabbi Morrison often spoke at international conferences about the spiritual aspects of preserving cultural heritage. The menorah ceremony last week was extraordinary, Rabbi Morrison reported. When we lit it for the first time since 1943, I swear I could feel the presence of everyone who had touched it, prayed over it, hoped it would survive. Uncle Ray didn't just preserve object, she preserved the connections between past and future. As the meeting continued, Cal looked through the conference room windows at the harbor where Uncle Ray had first established his preservation operation. Commercial ships still used the port, but they shared the facility with researchers, families, and visitors who came to understand how one man's courage had created a legacy spanning generations. Tommy burst through the conference room doors with the excitement that characterized all his discoveries. "Dad, come see what Mrs. Chen found in her garden." They followed Tommy outside to where Mrs. Chen was carefully brushing soil from a small metal object near the memorial's entrance. As the dirt cleared, a familiar symbol emerged, the anchor and compass design that had marked Uncle Ray's preservation sites. "It's another compass," Tommy announced, "but this one's different." Cal examined the object carefully. Unlike the first compass Tommy had found, this one bore an inscription in multiple languages. "For those who continue the work, SR 1975. "Uncle Ray left this for us," Tommy said with absolute conviction. He knew someday someone would find it and understand what it meant. Sarah was already photographing the compass and checking its coordinates against Uncle Ray's master manifest. "The needle points toward a location that's not on any of our maps," she announced. "Cal, I think Uncle Ray left us one more secret." That evening, Cal and Tommy walked the docks where Uncle Ray had first accepted responsibility for preserving other people's hope. The memorial had transformed the port into a place of healing and reunion, but the essential mission remained unchanged, protecting the dignity and heritage of families who had lost everything except their trust in human goodness. "Dad, do you think we've done what Uncle Ray wanted us to do?" Tommy asked as they reached the end of the main pier. Cal looked at his son, then at the memorial that bore Uncle Ray's name, then at the harbor where refugees had once found safe passage to new lives. The physical transformation was remarkable, but the spiritual transformation was even more significant. A place that had once hidden treasures in fear now displayed them with pride, reuniting families with their heritage while educating the world about the importance of preserving cultural memory. "I think we've made a good start, buddy. But Uncle Ray's work doesn't end with us. It continues with every family we help, every story we preserve, every person who learns that courage can survive any darkness." Tommy nodded with the seriousness he brought to all matters involving Uncle Ray's legacy. "So we're like links in a chain. Uncle Ray was one link. We're the next links. And someday other people will be links after us." "Exactly." As they walked back toward shore, Cal reflected on the journey that had begun 6 months earlier with a crumbling port and a single father's financial struggles. The memorial had solved their practical problems. Cal now earned a good salary as the facilities director. Tommy attended a better school, and they lived in a comfortable house near the harbor. But more importantly, they had found purpose that transcended personal circumstances. The newest compass suggested that Uncle Ray's secrets weren't exhausted yet. There would be more discoveries, more families to reunite with their heritage, more opportunities to honor the courage of people who had preserved hope during humanity's darkest chapters. But tonight, as father and son walked together through the memorial that bore Uncle Ray's name, Cal felt the quiet satisfaction of promises kept and trusts honored. The bronze plaque at the entrance captured the essential truth. Courage had found safe harbor at the port, not just during the war years, but in every generation that chose to continue the work of preserving human dignity. Tommy's sketchpad was filled with new drawings images of families embracing recovered photographs, children touching artifacts their grandparents had thought lost forever, communities gathering to celebrate the return of sacred objects. The boy had learned to see the spiritual dimension of preservation work, understanding that objects became sacred not through their monetary value, but through their connection to human love and memory. As they reached the memorial's entrance, Cal placed his hand on the bronze plaque, feeling the solid warmth of the metal beneath his palm. Uncle Ray's story had begun, with a young man surviving the unthinkable and finding the courage to help others survive too. It continued with a single father, choosing to honor that courage rather than profit from it. And it would continue tomorrow, and for generations to come, as long as there were people who understood that some things are more important than money, that some trusts transcend individual lifetimes, and that courage, once kindled, creates light that never dies. The harbor fog rolled in from the ocean, as it had every evening for decades. But now it seemed less like a shroud and more like a gentle blanket, protecting the memorial's sacred work, while families around the world dreamed of treasures waiting to come home.